I never asked pronunciations. Is it Alyssa?
It's Eliza.
Elisa. See,
Hmm. It's not intuitive, so I'm always prepared.
I need to be better because the book club cohort is full of people with very unique names, and
Hmm.
I'm always like, oh, we're live. Let me ask.
I mean,
Anyway, if you're here, whether in the Facebook group, which we should check and see if we're live there, or on the YouTube, or anywhere out in the ether, say hi. Leave us a comment and let us know what you're watching. This is a very important text. I wish more of you would read it with us. If you, as I say every live, if you have any questions about learning more about the history of Black women in the world throughout history, you have to start with the theory because we are not named in the text. And that's why we've done the reading we've done. We've done Hortense Spillers, we've done Cynthia Hartman, and now we're doing Dr. Higginbotham. When this piece in particular is really critical to the landscape of historical studies and how Black women are considered as historical subjects. And it gives you the tools to kind of whatever area of research. I was just talking to, dang, I already forgot, Elisa. Did I say it right?
Eliza. Just,
Elisa.
just
Okay.
think of the Portuguese way that they'll do it. It's
Elisa.
just so.
I just, I got it. I got it. But Elisa being from Cape Verde, right? And considering sort of, there's a whole Canada history about like early Americas, the transatlantic slave trade. Cape Verde has its own particularly unique history, being colonized by the Portuguese, and being an island, and the sort of how that kind of socializes somebody into their identity. There's so much history and so many lanes of research around Black women that can be done, that it's not that we wanted to tell you, okay, here's where you go look. We wanted to give you the tools so you can decide on your own where to go look. Hence why we are reading African American Women's History in the Metalanguage of Race. And this is from an American perspective, but the theory, framework, methodologies that Higginbotham presents are methodologies that you can take across areas of research. So today we are on, if you are in the syllabus, which we have for in a print version, you can buy this on our website or get the downloadable PDF. We are on page 21 of the syllabus. And if you are just following along in the text of the essay, we are on page 262. And I am actually going to bring up, what folder? Independent study, maybe?
I'm going back on that page. You said 21?
262 or page 21 of the syllabus.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm just going to search my good notes real quick
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know where I texted that. And I've read it so many times across so many different classes. I don't know what folder I put it in. Metalanguage. Here we go. Okay. So get all my highlighted notes and the syllabus. Ooh. You know, the one thing that our syllabi seek to do is to make the reading more accessible. And when you get into academic text, when I read the text, there is always a plethora of language that I am circling.
Mm-hmm.
Did I not put imbrication because it's underlined in my edition, but I didn't. I don't think I put it in the glossary. Anywho,
Invitation.
yeah, there's always a glossary in the syllabi to help
Yeah.
people understand some of the more complex language that is used.
You know what? Weirdly, when I am reading things and I don't know the word, I'll just continue not knowing the word until I finish the text. I'll just, at some point in the future, I'll eventually learn what the word means, but I'd rather not stop.
Oh no,
um,
I will circle and come back to. So I like read in short spurts.
mm,
Um, I don't know, especially when you're reading about like language. And we did Spillers was one of the first academic texts we looked at. I just don't think there's any way to get through a text that dense not knowing what the word means.
Definitely.
Because some of the words are like the or how she's identifying the theory. So like metanomic.
Yeah, I definitely thought it was helpful, particularly for this text. It's a pretty wordy text. Um, so I definitely think it was a good idea and a good approach.
Mm, yeah. So I think the questions for this section in the syllabus start at page 44 or 45 rather, because we answered that question in the last discussion. But before we
Mhm.
get into the questions, I guess we can overview what this section is about. Um, where Higginbotham is building out and continuing her argument about how race constructs all other dynamics within language. So, class, gender, now we're into sexuality. And she opens with that sexuality has come to define the evolving conception applied to the body, but given meaning and identity by economic, cultural, and historical context. Yeah. And if you do any further reading, this is a theory that comes up time and time again about how sexuality is identified. I'm taking a gender studies course, and we literally just read a piece by Gloria Alvarez where she was
Mhm.
pushing back against the identity marker of lesbian and as
Mhm.
a Chicana, not relating to that nomenclature because it just lumps her in with a bunch of women who may have, same gender loving identity, but nothing else about them is similar. And the way they love, the way they pursue love, the way they see themselves is not similar outside of the fact that they love other women and femmes. And she felt that like the overarching use of lesbian in the academy or even queer obscure the diversity of identities that existed, and that she should have a right as a Chicana to use a language that she's comfortable with to identify who she is and who she loves, or who she is.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I think um I guess my overall sentiment of this section, which started out as Black women's bodies epitomize centuries-long European perceptions of Africans as primitive, and were like and savage, etc. I think it definitely brings up, part of the reasons why the diaspora exists today in the Americas and elsewhere, partially has to do with being almost like perpetual victims of sexual violence, and like the projection of Europeans' ideas of like African culture as being savage, etc. That's like a thing, and then also the projection of their own internalized shame around sexuality, and then using that and weaponizing that as a way to continue to control and dehumanize. Um, and yeah, it was definitely, going into the different examples around um, the way notions of womanhood was not applied, or offered to Black women throughout history. Um, and then, interestingly, like the idea of a lady, for example, like, which is not applied to all white women or all women of, all European ancestry. It's like a particular kind of like location in society. So then it was definitely not applied to Black women. And then them not taking into account the different, I thought it was interesting, the point around how there's different class mobility even within Black people, especially post Reconstruction, and then not being able to go into the lady car even if you can afford it, or you come from a background where you have a certain level of, like you're not necessarily relegated to working class type of labor, and so behaving or assuming like, as a woman that you would have these rights in the society, and then being rejected for that, on the basis of your race. So I thought that was interesting. And yeah, I think, just the ongoing also themes of shame and silence around sexuality amongst Black communities that's a thing. That's the thing.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think to the point, because I think you were. It's funny because you quoted directly something that I have highlighted boldly on page 263, about that Winthrop Jordan's now classical study of racial attitudes towards Black women between the 16th and 19th century argues that Black women's bodies epitomize century-long European perceptions of Africans as primitive, animal-like, and savage. And then if you go to the bottom of the paragraph, it is that the Black woman came to symbolize, according to Sander Gilman, an icon for Black sexuality in general. The discursive gap between the races was, if anything, greater between white and Black women than between white and Black men. And
Mhm.
I think, what Higginbotham is asserting here is that, like, who even gets to identify their sexuality? This is a conversation I think we tend to have within the social media age when we get into the transphobia conversation, right? And people try to make this argument, and they're trying to explain to Black women who are holding on to transphobic beliefs that, like, trans liberation is a benefit to Black women, because often transphobic commentary and trans violence is labeled at Black women first, right? Like, who even gets to be seen as a woman? Who is not masculinized? Who is not taunted for this identity of gender and sexuality that's largely shaped around our labor and our invisibility? And so she's kind of pointing out, even in this construct of this discursive nature, which is how language moves throughout society, is that so much of how we understand sexuality and who gets to identify and define their own sexuality is shaped by race, by gender, and by class. Like, there's an economic, there's a racial aspect to it. There are all these power dynamics, and there's no neutrality in any frame of language, but especially in this arena. And as historians, when we are grouping, or just scholars in general, when we are studying people and deciding how we want to label them, how we want to group them together, how we want to identify them, we do have to consider, this is why people are always like, oh, there's, y'all like to talk, but y'all don't have no class analysis. Y'all talk about race, but you have no class analysis. That's kind of, what Higginbotham in this essay overall is really trying to bring home to us, is how to have this holistic analysis, that allows you to center the Black woman as, I would say, historical subject, because I'm a historian, but as a subject of research.
Definitely. And just on the note around having to, I think you mentioned briefly, maybe in a previous conversation, like having to read against the text in order to bring that out. I was thinking about how difficult it is sometimes when you're doing research on something that concerns Black women in history, like in Black studies, versus like you're doing something, in like a women's studies or gender studies, like canon. She made a point earlier, like, whereas white women and feminists generally have very little to say about race, similarly in Black studies and Africana studies, I found it's hard for me to find text that really like looks at the gender, class, and race. Like often in Black studies, they'll over essentialize the race and often amplify the experiences or perspectives of Black men, and that's holistically like the Black struggle or the Black perspective. And so that creates like problems, and when you're trying to like theorize like the actual reality and lived experiences of Black communities and all the different identities, etc., that exist within it, and it becomes like uh, just a challenge when you're trying to create history around it, or understand something throughout time, or understand a construct, because there are all these like frameworks that don't capture it over time.
That is it. I think guess we now we can move into some of the questions directly from the syllabus. So I'm on page 45. I have not put mine in because I have all my notes in my PDF. But the question is centered around the that enslaved Black women defined legally as capital meant that the years of forced reproduction and sexual activity with slaveholders was illegible as rape by societal and legal standards. After the Civil War, Black men were lynched under calls to protect white women. The repository of heirs to property and power, which is quoted on page 264, against rape, yet the rape of Black women by white men was legally sanctioned. And I think maybe I made this point because this is kind of, where my she does bring into this argument when she goes over Ida B. Wells. And on page 264, where she touches on the concept of rape. But I think maybe I personally shaped this question about the years of forced reproduction. That language comes from Deborah Gray White, who has the first book on history book on African American women. Aren't I a slave? Aren't I a woman? Ooh, not aren't I a slave? Aren't I a woman? About the Black women on the plantation, and kind of shaping the beginning history. Well, not the beginning, but the beginning academic sort of history presentation around understanding that the uniqueness of American slavery is that our society employed forced reproduction, with only a small group of Africans actually being forcefully migrated to the United States. Most of the Black community is via forced reproduction. And that does shape the way gender and sexuality and class and all these other identity markers are shaped through the societal structure of the Black body as capital, which comes from our reading of Hortense Spillers, right? That you are ungendered and you are unnamed, and you are broken down not from your human form, but you are broken down literally to your body parts and the capital and the value of your body parts. And that in particular for the Black woman, it is our reproductive organs that are seen as the biggest function of capital. And Gray White also then goes into this argument around both that our reproductive power was the capital of how we were valued, but also our ability to take care of the enslaved community. But that is also how we shaped our identity by buying into the American understanding of class, of gender and sexuality, by asserting some ownership of ourselves, by trying to align ourselves to the standard of woman who takes care of the home. So somehow how we are the basis for the identity, but then we try to feed into the identity. And in this reading, you see the contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is a way that like enslaved Black women on the antebellum plantation engage in their own sort of activism was through keeping the people within their community alive under very torturous circumstances. Now it benefited the slave owner, yes, but it was also sort of like it's a complicated.
That's so interesting. Yeah, like the contradictions, like the negation of one's womanhood, but then you also need their womanhood to continue on the reproduction of whatever capital you're trying to have. I think I highlighted in here a point around, this might be a later question in there, but just like around having a structure or like the state that has like a policy or a role in your private and intimate life. And I think it was so the categorization of class and racial groups according to culturally constituted sexual identities facilitated Black subordination within a stratified society and rendered them powerless against the intrusion of the state into their innermost private lives. This intrusion went hand in hand with the role of the state legislating and enforcing racial segregation, disenfranchisement, and economic discrimination. Um, so I think that sort of stood out to me around how your private life and your sexuality and your ability to produce then becomes it becomes a marker of your place within your community and also like within society, etc. And the state is sort of like the way I read it is it's just like it's a facilitator of all of that. And the state being a part of the general capitalist mode of production. So that's, I think, another way that you can't really separate the class, gender, and sexuality from each other. So, yeah, that
Yeah.
kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, it all relates. I think the question for this section really relates to what we're both saying. And the question is, it's a multi-layered question. Does the intrusion by the state still persist today, right?
Mm.
And how does the state both engage in intrusion and negligence via gender construction and laws that justify violence? Consider lynching laws, who the violence was perpetuated against, whom the laws were meant to protect, and who was excluded. So, do we still have this sort of like double standard that exists within state surveillance? Similarly, to the idea that Black men were lynched as a means to protect white women from rape, but the rape of Black women was not considered illegal as if a white man was perpetuating it. Because of Black women were not considered to be women under the law. Um,
Yeah. I don't know if I can think off the top of my head like a state sort of like apparatus on that, but we can definitely think of it from the crucifying of Black women's sexuality in the media in general. I mean, we can think about images being pushed out of Black women or condemning Black women's, for appearing sexual or promiscuity, etc., or being welfare queens, which has to do with reproduction and having children, and then depending on the state, even though statistically they're not even the majority that uses those types of support. And even the fact that relying on the state to support you and your children has become something criminal that wasn't always the case. Like, I think, probably around like FDR era, I think reliance on state support and subsidies was just something that was necessary, normal, and perfectly acceptable. But when it's sort of associated with Black women and their children, and which has to do with their sexual activity, it's something criminal. So I don't know, maybe it's like the general criminalization of Black women and Black people's sexual activity in general is the first thing that comes to mind for me.
yeah, I'm trying to think, where was I at? What was I thinking when I was 9 months pregnant and writing the syllabus? What the hell was I? What was I getting at? No, I think I was just thinking of um, like, how are we feeding into the ideals of womanhood, of femininity, in ways that are actually harmful to us? In ways where we're like, we are countering this conversation about being called cis, as in cisgendered, and being like, no, I'm just a woman, and how dare you say birthing bodies? I'm a woman because I can give birth, and you know, maybe there is still state surveillance, right? I think we're less
Mhm.
aware of it about who has, um, like sort of how eugenics is still happening in American society or in the world, whatever society we are coming out of. Um, how people are being forced onto birth control. So maybe I was thinking more of like Dorothy E. Roberts
Mm.
killing the black body,
Mhm.
how that correlates to the argument that Higginbotham is making here,
Okay.
right? The idea of like forced birth control and who's worthy of being a mother, who's worthy of being a woman who can make choices about her body. Um, Abortion laws, for instance, right? The surveillance that happens there, and the Black American community largely we kind of pro life quietly.
I hmm.
A lot of
You know
struggle
what?
around who gets to exercise a choice of whether or not to continue on, a pregnancy. And I think, and I'm on TikTok all the time. And as a mom, I get all this mom content. And I'm looking at these women with like lots of kids, like 4 kids under 4. And I'm like, the other side of it I have to think of is that societally, I could say, oh, why didn't you get an abortion very easily? But I know that there were like a lot of people that will talk you into having kids.
Mhm.
Communally, people that will convince you that children are a blessing. If no matter what your circumstances, you need to, give birth to that blessing, and make it very difficult for you to actually engage in deciding for yourself whether or not you want to continue a pregnancy.
That's true. I think the point you made around historically and probably currently like forced sterilization, even not just the Black woman, also includes Indigenous women. I believe there was also like a time in the 50s where Puerto Rican women were subjected to mass sterilization, lots of them like unbeknownst to them. So that's definitely a thing. I see that. In terms of like the choice of having pregnancy, it makes sense to me. Hmm, the whole thing around pregnancies and children, and that being tied to your womanhood, I would say that that's definitely very, very strong. I'm trying to like think like, like I was socialized as a Black American. I grew up in a kindergarten household, but I like from childhood, like I was socialized as a Black girl. So um, it's like I can see and identify with a lot of the constructions around Black womanhood, but I also um, am exposed to like varying experiences as well around expectations around motherhood and things like that. And I think one of the things I noticed in maybe Black immigrant communities, um, maybe if they're more religious, maybe less so, but some of the messages that I got, I think, around pregnancy, because it was such a preoccupation with like upward mobility and things like that, and going to school, and having everything straight and all set, um, was a lesser emphasis on motherhood and having kids. And I don't know if this is an anomaly, but like I kind of got messages like, you should do what you need to do to control that so that it doesn't deter whatever your career, your outcomes, et cetera, and things like that. And I would say that in Cape Verdean communities in general, there is a preoccupation with like going to school and like having status, and then children can come later, even though there is a high number of girls that they have families pretty young, or they have families without necessarily having all of that together, and it's like it's almost like not addressed. Like, how do we get from like this ethos of like have, have everything together and, either abstain or use birth control, whatever, to we don't talk about that, or
But even thinking about like that experience, how much do you think that was shaped by like class?
Hmm.
And that goes back to Higginbotham's argument, right? Like how these things intersect, and then how they shape our identity and how we move about the world. And that is what we should consider when we are, centering Black women as historical subject. Like you have this distinct experience. And I think just hearing you talk, there's like all this overlap that Higginbotham is talking about, right? In gender, in class, in race, and that then shapes, how you consider your
Absolutely.
socialization as a Black girl in America.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I always find it really interesting to, see, like, analyze things from a diasporic sort of, I guess, perspective. Because there is a lot of time spent, I hate the diaspora word, but there's like a lot of time spent talking at each other, those Negroes over there in the corner of the world, and like not a lot of understanding. So I love like integrating it with, theories that are housed in like, Black American experiences, and then like relating it and trying to understand why I had certain experiences. And, even on the note of having an identity that is intermingled with your race, like, for Cape Verdeans, like it's constructed, that entire Cape Verdean identity is around being like a mixed race population. And like that for some reason also gets entrenched with being a super sexualized identity as well, like the exoticism of all of that. And I see how that, a lot of young girls in my community, it seems on the surface that it's empowering to be put on, this pedestal as this like attractive sort of person. But then also it's, I see girls also being completely walked all over, like they don't have like an identity outside of that, outside of this like exoticism. And like that exoticism is like tied to this history of like, you know, being from a population that was subjected to like hundreds of years of sexual violence, like that's something to that we contend with to this day. And it's related to the legacy of slavery in the United States. And most girls that grow up here in the United States will identify with it, but it's also something that shapes and manifests your Black woman identity in a particular way.
Okay, let's move to the next question on page 46. Ooh, how many questions do we have for this section? 266. One. All right, yeah, two more questions, I think. So, pulling from a quote on page, am I going back? 263. We went forward and we went back. Violence figure preeminently in racialized constructions of sexuality. Oh yeah, that's the beginning of the last paragraph, first sentence on page 263. And then I do move back over to 265 for the quote. Through a variety of mediums, theater, art, the press, and literature, discourses of racism developed and reified stereotypes of sexuality. And these culturally constituted sexual identities facilitated Black subordination, rendering them powerless against the intrusion of the state into their innermost private lives.
This was on 260.
Yeah, 265. That quote is from the second paragraph. Well, the first full paragraph on the page, which starts off through a variety of mediums, which is the quote unquote. I'm sort of paraphrase that paragraph in the quote. So consider how we engage in upholding the violence embedded into how race constructs sexuality for gender. Black man, Black woman, and non-binary. How does our modern media engage in upholding racist stereotypes of sexuality? And I think what I was thinking of off top was just the idea of even like as cisgendered heterosexual black women who date men, how often when men cis het men perform badly, we claim they're gay. We continually reduce their violence and their harm doing as signals of homosexuality. And then we villainize essentially the gay person while also not confronting societally what encourages, allows, makes easy for men to replicate intimate partner violence and harm doing. And we don't at all consider our own engagement as mothers, as sisters, as people of the community in upholding the sort of patriarchy that allows that harm to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I think it makes me think of the sentiment of like patriarchy doesn't necessarily have a gender. So um, some of the contracts and expectations that we have for Black men that burden them and everyone else, harm them and harm everyone else, is upheld by a lot of different people in the Black community. And in terms of the media, I mean, you see you see more representations of different Black male sexuality now maybe than before, but it's definitely always and mostly has been um, either like somebody that's overly violent, not emotional, not like overly sexual, you know, like the something like the type of caricature that would justify the lynching of a Black man for assaulting a white woman. Um, and, you know, I think now more so we see maybe since the 90s and 80s, maybe since before that, like there's also the contrast of like the respectable Black men as well. Like I'm thinking maybe the Afrocentric version would be like T'Challa, you know, like the head of the, not only is he head of the Black family, but he's the head of a nation. You know, he's put together, he's well mannered, he's not overly doesn't overly make advances, and he's, you know, he's very respectable. And I would also say that T'Challa caters to white imperialism. And so, you know, and that's a whole other thing. And so we have like these two, I think we have like two like very like polarized images of Black men, and there's like nothing in between. Like it's like you're either like um hood nigga and like you have no feelings and you all you do is you're just a violent person, or you're like Bill Cosby or T'Challa or Will Smith. You know, like there's no room for them to even explore what it means to be human. And then when they cut off that part of the humanity, that also translates into violence in the community as well, I think.
Excuse me. You definitely shook the table on that one. I mean, what do you expect from a Marvel movie?
I don't know what I expected, but I was mad.
How you were mad?
I when I first saw, like, for example, Michael B. Jordan come on, I didn't know that he was the villain. I thought that he was the hero because he sounded like a hero up until a certain point. So yeah.
You know, they tried it. Um, yeah. How much time do we have? Okay, we're 40 minutes in. Like let's move on to the next question. Would you like to read it on page 47?
Sure. This is an hour? Just checking.
Yeah. I'm trying to
Okay.
keep it under an hour.
I didn't realize that. Okay. What page?
On 47 in the syllabus.
All right. So Okay, so citing historian Darlene Clark-Hines' theory of culture of dissemblance, Higginbottom posits that Black women invoked a politic of silence and, quote, reconstructed their sexuality through its absence, through silence, secrecy, and invisibility, end quote. So the question is just around how has Victorian ideology continued to influence the self-representation of Black women today? Has a similar politic of silence been maintained about contemporary Black women's sexuality? Um, and how are Black women's sexuality intertwined with class aesthetics in the present day?
Yeah, I'm getting right here at all the femininity coaches on the internet.
I can see that. I can see that for
That's what
sure.
that was hitting at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um,
Ooh, let's look at the quote that I'm pulling from on 266. Where is it?
mhm.
Oh yeah, it's the last paragraph in the section. Did I quote it wrong? Did I say Deborah? No, it is Deborah Gray White. Get my Deborahs mixed up.
Um,
Oh no, it was Deborah Clark Hine who did the book I'm thinking of. Deborah Gray White is the one I met. She just had my purse.
it's the one that starts with "in response to."
Yes.
Okay.
Who did this? Oh no, I didn't. I was right. It's Deborah Gray White. Okay, why do I not be trusting myself? The Deborahs get me confused. Or Darlene rather. Darlene and Deborah, I always get confused. They, I don't think they write around the same time period. Darlene. Anyhow, doesn't matter. I'm tripping over myself here. Um, but yeah, in order to protect the sanctity of inner aspects of their life, Black women, especially those of middle class, reconstructed and represented their sexuality through its absence, through quiet, quiet femininity, through being unheard, unseen, unknown, from all their desires being kept hidden. And it's an adherence to Victorian ideology. And we do see that emerging in contemporary social media discourse, where Black women specifically are being encouraged to make ourselves invisible, make ourselves unknown in the guise of mystery and mystique and coquetteness that somehow we've been living to out loud. It's like, just let a Black woman be her.
Right.
Be whatever version of yourself you can love and go into the world that way.
Yes.
But we are reinvesting with class aesthetics that are not meant to help us. They are absolutely constructed and built to harm us.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that you can say around that. I I mean, like you said, it's definitely like even the Victorians had a hard time adhering to the Victorian ideals. Like it's not as if uh, like this ideas of like having virtue and like sexual repression and things like that. I'm confused. I'm not sure exactly what about it signifies that it would be liberatory to Black women, but I do understand that there are like trying to address like some historical wounds, like economic wounds as well, and wounds on one's womanhood, etc. I like understand why people just might be attracted to like the respectability and some of the protections it might bring. And I honestly, I won't say that individuals won't benefit from respectability, but it's like it was never meant to like en masse. It's not sort of like a liberatory process. I'm trying to think of like I'm also like I've watched like some of the videos that you've had on just like the hypergamy and things like that, and like a lot of those arguments are coming through my head, and I find it strange sometimes that these women, they kind of position themselves in opposition to Black feminists, etc., or any type of feminism or different types of progressive thinking when they directly benefit from it, like even the ability to be able to opt in to any type of like comfort or luxury or etc. I think that comes from the work of Black women a lot of the times. So I don't know how, I mean, I think like the answer is kind of clear, just how it's not going to offer you the freedom that you seek. It's not going to offer you like the ability to just be in the world. I'm thinking of the construct like crooked room. Like, yeah. So like if you're trying to fit yourself in a crooked room, you're always gonna come out looking crooked to these folks. So you might as well just be whatever you're gonna be.
And it's not that you can't be feminine and like softness and like being quiet. It is this idea that the construction of these ideologies telling us that as Black women, these are the things we should and need to be doing. That's the problem. It's not the problem that if that's what you enjoy.
Right.
But what is it rooted in? All right. Well, we can close out here unless you have any other thoughts you wanted to share, any other things you wanted to hit on. Anybody has any questions?
Yeah.
Are you out
there? I see some eyes.
Yeah, we have some viewers. We've had some viewership.
Yeah. I mean, overall, I think it was a good just discussion, a good text, weaving in a lot of different work that other people have done around construction of theory around Black women. And I thought it was generally a pretty good read, just weaving together different ideas and working through them. And yeah.
All right. Well, for everyone else, oh, thank you, Dee. Love to see you. For everyone else out there, we will have one more discussion on the text. Then I need to hit up Higginbotham. I'm a little nervous. So I'm like, who read with us? Can we get some questions from the community on the text? Anywho, I think I am going to hit up Higginbotham about meeting with the book club in December. I'm doing like a closeout wrap up of a bunch of author chats at the end of the year, because the rest of the year our reads are pretty light because I know everyone's busy, and this has been a very hard year actually. I don't know, this season feels heavy.
Yeah, definitely.
And so we're not trying to overload people with too much reading.
Yes, for sure.
All right, y'all. Have a good rest of your Friday evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Oh, not see, because it's just the thing. I'm thinking Eliza. But it's not Eliza because I have the Z down. I just have to get the vowel down. Eliza.
I have faith in you. You're well on your way.
Please forgive me and my mom brain. All right. Thank you, Eliza.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of y'all Friday, and I'll holler at y'all later. Let me get my mouse on the screen so